So it should be just...
Now for our third presentation of this panel. So Ian will be sharing with us some reflections on federated structures for cooperatives. And Ian is a professor emeritus at the University of Victoria. And I would say this, and he's not allowed to say that he is Canada's foremost cooperative historian. So we're very lucky to be here.
Actually, I've been running to be supreme dictator of the world. And the only thing I'm going to do is have uniform one kind of computer, no changes for 10 years. And I have a huge, huge support base.
Push that back.
Yeah, there you
Great, thank you.
go. So let's welcome Ian.
The topic that I'm involved with, the national project, is on federations, and with a particular focus on health and on rural cooperatives and the possibilities of national federations. I'm not going to talk very much about the last two things because I've done some work I'm not very happy with it yet, and I have a lot of interviewing and talking with people I want to do. But I will mention a few things. Mostly I want to talk about the issue of federations. I don't know how many times I've heard the emphasis on cooperative difference here in the last day and a half. It seems to come up all the time. Here's one, right here. And we overlook it. We don't think about the federated structures that we create and how they contribute and how they differentiate. I mean, we automatically seem to either reject it or apply it, the head office mentality, to a federation. And that's not the nature of the relationship in any federations I'm familiar with. So anyway, I'll elaborate this a bit more. What I'm trying to do is to think about the importance and nature and the distinguishing features of cooperative federations. And there are certain basic general issues that come up again and again. I'm going to be giving points that I'm sure are already in your mind, but I think it's important to dwell on it a little bit. And then understand the specific aspects and issues that confront new federations or federations that are being formed. Now there's another kind of issue buried in this, and it's broader than just the federations issue. It is that we tend to want to make cooperatives finite boxes from where they are today and not look back and see that they didn't fit those boxes. And in fact, they weren't even in boxes for a long time. The problem comes from the fact that we, for various good reasons, in the co-op movement, we had to insist on corporate structures that were registered. And that means we've under-emphasized, or we have under-examined the informal structures that go along with them. And this important federations. So there is a specific focus, and I will say a few words about that. Why are they important? Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I'm sure you know these will immediately come to your mind. This is the way in which co-ops build from local strengths, the most common way that they build. And it goes back incredibly far in the co-op history, into the 1850s. If you want to take the Rochdale, forget about Sussex, take the Rochdale approach, within 10 years, people working in or contributing to cooperatives were thinking of forming a federation. And they were thinking in very large terms. It's amazing. And they ultimately created a remarkable organization. Eliminate middlemen. If it's in a marketing situation, find ways to market more effectively. Undertake steady or stay healthy situations. And this is really important in certain kinds of cooperatives, where the federations assist in that. And most particularly maybe some of the more recent kinds of federations. Lobbying, providing services, accumulate assets, and it's accumulated in different ways. And this is why some of the strength of the co-op world is not fully realized. One of the things is that some federated structures don't fully document their assets. There's no great need for them to say how big they are. They may not want to say how big they are. And they're usually understated in the balance sheets, which is why they're often so nice to take over. Outside people get a chance. Career opportunities. You should never underestimate the ambitions of people working in co-ops or elected people in co-ops. Or thinking about where they fit in. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on this. I'm sure there are people in this room who've heard this a dozen times from me. But I will continue. I believe in the notion of cooperative stewardship. I don't like the word. It has Christian overtones that I don't think are appropriate in a global context, but it's the best word. And I believe in the values and principles cooperatives have to pay special attention to 5 different areas. You can even add something. These are the 5 main ones. And what that means is that a cooperative cannot ignore membership, which is very common, until suddenly they have a crisis. It means they cannot forget their community impacts. Well, they may want to think what they mean by community. They cannot ignore the state, and many cooperative approaches in their recognition of the political side. They cannot ignore the sector and the efforts and kinds of organizations we're thinking about today. This is a key part of the sector. So and then you have managing, which is a special kind of managing. It's a managing that, for example, takes a very different approach to members, community, state, etc. I could go on, but I won't. Now you can apply this concept to a local co-op, or you can apply it to a federation. And you have to say, what are they doing? I find this a very useful little blueprint to think about. And then the other thing that's important to understand for me is that cooperatives, I don't like life cycle because I know what happens at the end of a life cycle. And I have no intention of predicting that. And there's no reason. Some of the oldest organizations in the world are cooperatives. Formative, stabilizing, building, re-examining, and reformulating. That's what's left of my grade 12 algebra. To repeat it. Right? Re-examining, reformulating. Which is the ongoing process. Now, each stage has different meanings and different requirements for membership, for community, for state, and sector. They change. So if a federation comes along and it's really working for cooperatives in the formative stage, and it's in the formative stage, there's where some complexities emerge. So I won't go on any further. I hope it might interest you. And the federations, though, is an important dimension of how cooperatives function. And it's a part of their identity. Now, when I was thinking about that, I came up with this idea that we carry with us a bias toward the local. This is going to make me sound like I'm some interested West Coast plutocrat. I'm not. The point is we like the local. You know, mom and dad got together with the neighbors and they organized the child care co-op. We like the local. It's the romantic side of the cooperative world, and it's great. However, by emphasizing the local and thinking of what we say to people, right, it's always that. In my mind, you tell them what they can do locally. Okay, the bias toward the local is the primary frame of reference for most people. Co-ops tend to start as a way of meeting individual and community needs. That's the point. And that's how we sell them, if you want to be crass. And I think we've got to rethink that. It's an effective way to meet quickly many social and economic needs. The local is easy to understand, or you think it is. The accountability is simple. And when you get a larger federation, and you've got all kinds of complex relationships within there and skills, you know, my gosh, you're going to hire accountants and people out of all kinds of programs to run these things, and it gets very difficult. And I know in my own experience, a lot of people are suspicious of the sentiments of history because they don't understand. Okay? That's your first defense. So I think it's a double-barrel thing. The local is powerful because it gives us a promise and sometimes often the reality of empowerment. And it practices, it's an opportunity to practice, my friend Jack Brady used to emphasize so much, direct democracy. You know, the Athenian notion of democracy. We have a problem, let's call a meeting, let's get together, and we'll all have a vote, and we'll resolve it. Well, when you get tears, when you get all kinds of complexities, it's not so easy. The advertising and promotion of local co-ops is the norm. Think about it. Now there are exceptions. Desjardins is very good at this. Cooperators is getting better. And the YCA. But I would say they're the exceptions. We don't talk, we don't project the idea of the enormity and the possibility of the system and what the tiers, if you like, provide. And so we have interests of local leaders, and an understandable human situation is people become involved in a local co-op, and it's my co-op, and I'm going to protect my co-op, and keep your hands off my co-op. I don't care what the wholesale wants to do. Oh, that's good. The bias towards the local, I said that. It's not a result of literature, by the way. I don't want this to be thought of. I mean, people like Brett Fairburn and others who've written about central organizations, I think we've done a pretty good job. But I don't know how to say this in a nice way, so I won't try. But I'm not sure too many people read what has been written about history and development of co-ops. Especially people in co-ops. I mean, they like to have them on the shelf, but how much they read. Now that sounds like a knowing laugh from Paul for that. But it's not the result of the literature, because the literature is stronger than it might be. But there is a problem in literature in that it tends to be very descriptive and often issues left there because they're complicated to deal with. Rather, it's a consequence of practice and, being in a nasty mood, arguably insufficient reflection generally within the movement about what it's about. If you thought more about it, you'd realize, you know, the value of thinking of the tears. The music of the tears. The music of the tears in the co-op world, it ranges from harmony to discordance. Sometimes it works beautifully. The other 80% of the time, there's discordance. And it's for good reason. It's not good. I have friends who can't believe the cooperators fight like they do. And I always say, why not? They're talking about their food, their work, their housing. They should be, involved, and sometimes that means discordance. But anyway, in this, when you look at the issues in the tiers in networks and federations, decisions on core objectives are always difficult. Setting membership rules is a perennial. Selecting from the long list of possible activities, I believe that cooperative organizations are, when they are left alone, and given scope, are very entrepreneurial. So on a local or on a federated level, there are always possible activities cut inside. Voting entitlements, I think I lived through 3 rounds of this with DC Credit Union. The funding formula that apply. The process they use to make decisions. Finding leadership is a real problem. And another perennial, when you undertake a new activity, where do you do it? At the local or the federated level? Why? And those are always, if you look at the credit union history, you see this concept. Right. So, given such complexities and despite the benefits, why federations are over as good as it is. I wish I didn't have to. I think it's implicit. Federations and the structures that are associated with are implicit in cooperative law, which is an considered dimension of cooperation. And the whole lot can be said there. Social movement solidarity. A lot of cooperative organizations come from, are associated with social movements, and they often bring a kind of perspective that draws you out of communities, single local communities, and other and upward and outward. Economic opportunity is another major source. A crucial one, and this is especially true of the two federation ideas that are really at the end of this process, are government relations to state. You go back to those list of 5 things. That's, from a federated perspective, that state relationship is frequently fundamental. Public relations and information. I won't dwell on that. Cooperative entrepreneurship, I've made it, and then there's ambition. Ambition occurs in purpose. And as management sets elected leaders, it affects how federations are developed and where they go and how they have to deal with issues. So, given the variety of contexts and the multiplicity of sources, there's no single way in which federations or alliances develop. And, you know, that sounds like a nice trite statement, but it's important to remember because many people use as a measuring stick the federations that are now well established. Well, you're not like Federated, you're not like Co-op Atlantic, are you sure you're okay? That kind of thing. And in fact, the federations are going to be quite variable depending on what they're in. That's a problem. Unless you want to only have one box. And the variations go on. I just mentioned a number of them. They're very obvious to me when I look at some of the federations. You know, the one that always comes up is availability of funds, but I'm not so sure that's the key. The most important one. The other thing is to realize what I was trying to suggest earlier when you talk about federations. You shouldn't try to understand the past by what you think the present should be. In other words, the institutions that emerge now. There are all kinds of ways. In the credit union world, for example, alliances are probably, and there's a question here, alliances are probably more important than federations. Credit unions function together with alliances, and I think other places too. Why is that important? The federation idea has an inclusive dimension to it. Alliances don't. We ally, sorry, you know, that kind of thing. And it happens all the time. And so the inclusive dimension of cooperatives can be lost. But alliances have many other advantages. We can go and have lunch and make our decision. Right? Okay, thank you. Okay, so you know, as I think about this, I find 5 prominent patterns. I've been visual models, but that's not right. And I coined a new word, hubness. You probably haven't heard that before. The drive to hubness. The idea that the central organization becomes the powerful force. There are many pressing examples of that. The British is maybe the most obvious one, but there are many others where organizations, federations are created, and the idea is that gradually over time the local organizations and the local membership are less important. The pyramid is meaning. And that's and the British example is really interesting because there's a whole kind of justification for it that's fascinating, it's lost in time, but it's left the British with the system, but they had to reform dramatically in the 1980s and 1990s, and you know they made significant strides. And it's emulated in several European consumer movements. The hub, the federation, is where the action is. You could probably think about it. That's not. The federated trends in community-based financial cooperation, I think they're a little different maybe because I spent more time on these, but it's quite a different system in the financial cooperatives. And I think it has to do with the nature of the business, the nature of the relationships between the tiers, the nature of the financial markets. And so you have, it's kind of a hub, but it varies considerably. One of the hardest jobs I ever had was, I don't remember, this is terrible, I don't remember what the country was in Africa. But someone there who had experienced both Desjardins and CCA development asked me, why are they so different? Think about it for a minute. They are dramatic in terms of their development processes. And their structures are different, and there's historical reasons for that, all kinds of reasons for it. But the federated, the community-based financial cooperatives, I think need to be looked at independently because of the underlying issues around responsibility, the management of money. I think it's a different world. The prominent patterns, the third, how did I get to 4? Because I didn't count them. Federations with charismatic beginning. This is weird, but I can't think of another way of putting it. These are cooperative federations that began because there was a charismatic, there he is, there's Aaron Sapiro, he doesn't look like that, but he was. And out of him came, out of his work came Sunkist, Sunmade, Welch's. You probably this morning had something care of Aaron Sapiro in your breakfast. In Canada, that became too important to the wheat pools, the dairy pools that we created, and I'm being pulled off the stage. In them, there's a central importance of education and information, and implicit in this approach is sometimes, and often, a questionable co-op commitment. Amazing how quickly the pools faded away. Oh, that's why I got it. Accumulation of local co-ops. This is the most common way, and it's the one that's least examined, because we judge by present success going back, and many of these don't work out too well, or they remain so small, so narrow, that they don't have a whole lot of impact. But the common beginnings for worker co-ops, some forms of agricultural co-ops, health programs, which is what we're interested in particular. So I think the problems they have come out of this particular pattern. And the struggles are over delegated responsibilities, who takes accountability for what. And there are complexities that are almost inevitable with existing and established co-ops. They're very concerned about government relations. They usually are involving co-ops in their formative and stabilizing phases, which is important, I think, for whatever one wants to conclude about health co-ops and the new forms of agriculture. And there's always an unfair comparison with old and established federations. The national federations, I know this is a CCA event, but I won't say anything more, because it's a special kind of federation. And I think they do blend a little bit. Anyway, there are characteristics of those federations. So on the conclusions, creating federations, it's ingrained in the co-op movement. There are many reasons why co-op federations are formed. The purposes and modes of organization vary considerably. And underlying much of it is the significant government policies and administrative systems, the state. Okay, agriculture, rural co-op federations, 30 seconds. Is that right? All right. Remarkable variations around the world. Incredibly interesting history. It really is, because there's so much benefit. And it's embedded in this agricultural policy, which is as a field of interest, if you have such a perverted set of interests, is a fascinating thing. How it changes, how we went from, I won't get comparative, in Canada we're different because we have a lack of national farm cooperative organizations. And that's surprising in some respects, but not in others. One of the ones that have survived, and it's usually on a regional or basis, one of the keys, seems to me, as I look at it, is their ability to control the input market. In other words, the farmer input market, or influence it. And they often do become a kind of hub. UFA, to me, looks like a hub. Sector specialist co-ops are another dimension of that, and I won't think on it. It's a plethora. It's a big swath of Canadian history. And you cannot remove a consideration of federations without looking at underlying rural change. If I was asked to name 3 or 4 major changes in Canada in the 20th century, one of them would be rural transition. It's unbelievable what we did in the 20th century without much, there were protests in there, but it wasn't, in view of the changes that were made, it's remarkable. And there's a whole bunch of aspects of that. The challenges of orderly marketing, I wouldn't want to be a dairy farmer in Quebec. I'm not so sure that it's as safe as it once was in the orderly marketing systems. The agricultural consumer dichotomy, which is deeply, there's different dimensions of it, but the specific one here that's really important is a competition over who sells what to whom. And in more recent times, the rise of what I call, or the increasing of rural individualism. I went home once from from Saskatchewan, having spent a month there in 1976. And I told my wife, I want to write a book called That Summer in Saskatchewan. Because what I saw, and I visited all kinds of places, I don't know what the project was, but I remember what I saw. And I saw young people and old people, and they were not of the same planet. Young people were totally different in their expectations and who they were. You could see visually. My wife didn't encourage me to write. Okay. Stop. Okay, I'm sorry. But I always do it in total, so I'll stop. But there will be more. I think what this will end up in is 3 or 4 papers. And I welcome your comments on any of this. I'll do this. This is one last thing. There it is. There's my email. If you have any comments, advice, nasty criticisms, please send them.
So I wanted to say that on our website, Measuring the Cooperative Research Network, Cooperative Difference, you can get articles and these presentations so that we make sure that you get to digest some of the information a bit more. We do have our 4th presentation of our panel here. I'll invite Paul Sabaya, the Director of Cooperative Development from the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association, and Paul Kiley is also filling in for John Rustakis, the Executive Director from the British Columbia Cooperative Association, to take us through some information on cooperative survival rates today. So welcome, Paul.
I really want to find out actually what happened in the summer of '73 in Saskatchewan that Ian's wife doesn't want to talk about. But that could be later on. Survival rates of co-ops in Alberta and BC. How many people know about survival rate differences? There was a study in Quebec. Traditionally talked about. What is it? Survival rate of co-ops after 5 years compared to traditional firms. It's better. It's better. More than double in most cases. After 5 years, it's 64%. Before this study happened, I used it consistently in my work around co-ops. And the work that was done here with BC and Alberta was just seeing if that was an anomaly or is it the same case or any different in BC and Alberta. This study actually came out of a group called BALTA, which is the BC Alberta Alliance on Social Economy, which just got its funding renewed, which is great. So we got another 3 years going forward. And so this is one of the pieces that came out of that. The study was actually done by Richard Stringer, who was the former Director of Co-op Development in Alberta, and Carol Murray, who's the current Director of Co-op Development in BC. So I'm actually speaking on their behalf. I didn't do this research. So if there's any complaints, you can talk to them. But, I'll try to do the best I can. Some of the BC project stats, 41 operating co-ops and 150 total completed the online survey. Okay, so these were co-ops for a 10-year period that they looked at. So 150 co-ops have been incorporated in a 10-year period. Basically, it's really stepped to the plate for us as well too. So we're very happy to see that happen. And there's some particular issues around developing capital and membership relations for housing co-ops. Although what we're seeing a little bit too is there's almost a need for a distinction. I think there may be a need for a seniors housing co-op federation as compared to a general co-op housing federation, because the needs are getting a bit. You can't actually get them all aligned in terms of the development needs and ongoing growth processes. So this one didn't come out so well. Well, these are just my questions that I put out at the end. You can't really see the tricks. There. Oh, thank you. See, you've used President before. That's good. One thing that didn't come out, I had these after 83% of the responding co-ops. This was the 18 we talked to plus the 8 interviews. 83% of them did not have staff. They're voluntary organizations. So that's one thing we should put some pause about these questions and comparisons. We compare these co-ops survival rates after 5 years, more than double the private sector. It may be a better comparison is with the nonprofit sector. So taking a look at that. Keep that with a grain of salt. The ongoing care and financing and capitalization is a huge one, how you federate the capitalization around that, and what role can be, the credit unions are now more traditional in some ways, what can they play in that, playing some role around that, and as I talked about before already, glad to follow up with Ian, because it seems to be a huge role as Co-op Association of Alberta, as developers, what do we do to support the federation of co-ops in particular sectors? So there you go. So I take no responsibility for presenting that data.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks to all of our presenters today. I think we're just a couple of minutes over time. I know some folks are going to be heading in about 12 minutes to the CASP AGM. So I'm wondering if we have any burning questions that we need to address before we part ways. Yes, Jason.
Just say two quick things. I think that comparison to the nonprofit would be hugely important, but also other social enterprises that aren't co-ops, because I think, this is pure guess, but I think that there's a lot of survival that happens through volunteer labor, which isn't captured necessarily by that comparison, that one-to-one comparison. And also just wanted to ask Ian on federations, because I missed something, and it's a point of clarification which we can solve over shuffleboard tonight. But when you said there's the bias towards the local and the federations, to me the federation is a response to the bias towards the local. I see that from political theory. As opposed to a centralized state, when you have a bias towards the local, you want federation because it takes power away from the center. Is that what you were saying, or did I miss?
No, it's what all I was trying to say was that when we think of not here in this room, but when people in co-ops think about a co-op, it's the one down the street. They don't recognize the associations. And the local co-ops or credit unions are usually incredibly poor at talking about central organizations and what they do. And there are reasons for it. They're there to impress their members, there's a whole bunch of them like that. Why they don't necessarily stress the value of the tiers, right? That's the point I was trying to make.
So would the federation, the co-op difference in the federation, be the result of the bias towards the local?
No, I think that that's what I don't express this very well. But what I'm trying to get at is that in understanding the co-op difference, we don't realize how significant these tiers are and what each tier contributes, and where the possibilities lie within that. And on a very individual level, when you are, put it this way, if you are on the board of Credit Union Central of Canada, you're from BC, or we'll call that Alberta Central, and on a local credit union, where is your loyalty? Right? I mean, that's a common political issue too. But it's a problem, or can be a problem. And the instinctive one is saying, my loyalty is with Medicine Hat Credit Union. I would say that's wrong. It's the board of Credit Union Central. But that's what it is. Can I just say one comment? That clip in BC, you of course will remember vividly the stages that I had on the chart there. That, I think, is likely connected to the problems of the stabilizing period of organizations. We did a lot of work, it was a BCICS on the formative stage, and we were trying to get to the next stage, but it didn't happen. To look at what happens in the stabilizing phases. And I think there are some endemic problems and there are very specific problems, types of co-ops. The stabilizing credit union or co-op generally is not simple. And that's where it would be interesting to understand what the crises were that led to it.
And that's that year 3 to 7. That's when the phases
That's
happen.
exactly about.
Thank you for interpreting that well.
You want 3 hours, I think.
Thanks, Ian. And thanks again to all of our presenters. We had a pretty good session. Jessica, did you put your presentation? It's coming.
So, noble thing to do. Hello, everybody. I think we're ready to start this morning. You have one big panel here that will be talking about measurements of performance. And the slides are coming up. Now it's up. Yay, thank you. So my name is Sonja Novkovic, and I will just give you a quick introduction, and we'll have each speaker speak about 10 minutes. That should take us an hour altogether, and then have half an hour for questions and comments from you guys. The panel is about measuring and reporting on cooperative difference. So we will be, in this panel, talking about the general overview of the kinds of measurements we have in mind for cooperatives and the kinds of tools that we have been developing within our various roles. One of the roles you see on this big panel and my slides and others, some of the others, is the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network, which is a CURA, Community University Research Alliance, that we have in from Ottawa. The CCA is a partner institution. And then we have Marie-Paule Robichaud from another CURA in the French Canada, and she will be speaking to you a bit later. And we have Russ Christensen, who is not a part of the network, but who inspired some of us in the network to actually use the tool that he has developed earlier. So we'll be talking in general terms in this panel. The next panel in this same room will talk more specifically about sustainability, measuring sustainability, and the scorecard that's been developed by Russ and by some of our researchers. And then there's another stream of measurements panels, and that one is at 4 o'clock today, and it's Jessica, Lou, and Linda who are speaking that. We will give you the number if you're interested of the room, because it's in another room, not in this one. So there's a whole stream of panels that we've organized in order to tackle this question. Many others in the social economy research networks have also worked on these issues and on the question of how to measure performance in cooperatives. So what I will do is just put up a slide that actually I extracted from a presentation that I gave in Cancun at the ICA Research Conference in November, that one-day seminar. And basically what I'm just laying out here is that cooperatives, that we're coming from an understanding that there is a value in measuring performance for cooperatives that is slightly different than other types of organizations. And there are different reasons why cooperatives need to measure what they do, particularly their social and community impact, obviously, because the financial indicators are not difficult to come by. But why they need to understand, why they need to measure what they do is, here I have 4 reasons. I'm sure you will come up with 4 more, at least. But the 4 that I kind of thought about were that one of the reasons why we need to measure what we do is to understand this different business model, because it is still poorly understood in the sector and outside of it. And its purpose, its advantages, and its disadvantages. So where do cooperatives work well, where do they not work well, why, and so on. So there has to be some sets of measures devised that are going to help us understand that business model and its difference, if any. To understand, the second reason why we need to measure what we do is to understand how cooperative identity, defined by the principles and values of cooperation, how that creates a strategic advantage in the business context. So we are all again coming from an understanding that cooperatives because they do have a movement behind them, have something that other types of businesses do not, and that they should really work into their business practices the way that they apply principles and values. So this is in part what motivated many of us here to actually try to devise those kinds of measures that are going to highlight the cooperativeness, if you will. And then the third reason why we need to measure what we do is to understand the impact of cooperative sector on people and communities, in part to influence policies, but also to actually really understand how we impact community that's different from creating jobs that anybody, any other kind of business will do as well. Are those longer-term jobs? Are they better jobs? Are they, so are they worse? So what we just need to be able to say more about what it is co-ops do. But community impact in particular, we all know that any cooperative CEO will tell us they do the right thing, or they try to do the right thing. What does that mean? How do we quantify that? Do we need to quantify that? But at least we need to understand whether really there is any difference. And so this is in part work with credit unions that some of us are doing and so on. And the last is to achieve public awareness, because again, we all seem to hear all the time that this business model is the best kept secret, and it continues to be a secret. It still isn't in our textbooks, it still isn't in our curricula, not nearly as much as it should be. And so achieving public awareness of the size, the scope, and the benefits of the cooperative sector and its promotion, measurements such as the Global 300 list, which now is the monitor, and similar kinds of efforts from the ICA and others in the cooperative movement, is also part of this bigger picture. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll get a sense of what people are doing and what kinds of measurements they've been applying. And as I said, more detail will come on each of these later in following panels. Thank you. Who's next? Jessica? No? Yes.
Good morning, everybody. It's a big mic. Okay, so I'm talking about the project, the Prairie Node. The Prairie Cluster is involved in one of the Prairie Cluster projects on measuring the impact of credit unions on their communities, on their members and their communities. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of that. And we do have a panel, I think it's 4:15, I don't remember what room. We'll figure it out later. So the purpose of our study is to better understand the precise benefits that credit unions provide to their communities, specifically the ways that credit unions help their members create wealth, financial stability, well-being, and skills. We want to focus on impact. What we're learning is that it is, as Sonia already said, it's somewhat easier to measure some of the regular business and financial aspects, but putting them together, understanding how they interact and then impact not just the members themselves, but also the whole community. We focused on credit unions actually just to start the process of unpacking some of this, because credit unions they have such great records. They actually are involved in helping people own assets. And so and they do a lot of stuff in their communities. So they were a great example to start with. After, I don't know, probably a year or two of looking at a bunch of literatures about, measuring social impacts and things like that, we came up with a huge list of indicators that we then later tried to break down into smaller units in terms of how we ask questions on a survey, how we ask interview questions. We also had a variety of questions for managers of credit union versus members versus board members, that kind of thing. But this is the list. The first one is the obvious one, the economic activities, the standard statistics. Plus, we also wanted to try to look at what were the types of exchanges and transactions, particularly on a community level. The role of the credit union in the market in terms of what kind of market share it had, because that also helps to explain the impact. The asset ownership, both of the credit union itself as well as the members, and then investment in other social enterprises, because that was another important way to look at impact in community. If the credit union was able to actually invest it in other enterprises and or was able to lend money for those developments. The financial transparency is also important because everybody knows for a co-op, we know, or we're supposed to know, what's happening to the entity, right? As members, we're supposed to vote on budgets, we're supposed to know what's happening in the financials. That financial transparency is also a financial literacy, right? And that, again, it can be another impact on community. Employment and quality of employment, Sonia mentioned those already. The economic linkages, where the credit union itself actually spends their money, how they recirculate local dollars, what's the multiplier, that's actually going to be our hardest piece, it looks like, and then their impact on community development. Not just the fact that they're in the community, but what other things do? They donate to community, they sponsor clubs and contests and things, but they also invest in the community in some very specific ways sometimes. Education and training, another one that's pretty obvious to people in the co-op movement. But in this case, we're also looking not just at how board, staff, and members are trained, but also what kind of training spills over to community members, either because the existence of the credit union, because of what the credit union members are doing, or because of campaigns that the credit union's doing. Diversity of members also is another great indicator. Are you really hiring local? Are you hiring local indigenous? Are you hiring women? What's the composition of your management team, your board, etc.? And then, of course, the democratic economic participation, that's another really hard one, right? Because it's not really about if you just went to your AGM meeting, right? It's somehow if you did more than that. And how we tease that out, again, some of that we're trying to figure out how we get that out of interviews as opposed to just whether you check off a couple of things on a survey. And then the leadership and social capital development, also hard to exactly articulate. One of the things we're having trouble with is getting people, when we ask them a question, to be able to answer us in a way that's not just, oh yeah, I attended that meeting, or oh yeah, I've been on the board. Because we're trying to figure out not just whether you do some of those perfunctory things, but then what kind of skills you developed, how active has that made you in the rest of your life, things like that. And some of those are hard to pull out. Even in an interview, we found people aren't used to being asked that kind of impact question, and so it's been hard to get answers. So I think I sort of went over this one. We already, great, thanks. We already talked about the list of indicators. We did a huge sort of matrix of them and then narrowed them down. We developed questions first for managers and board members, and then a few lower level staff, and then members. We tested the questions with the managers. We worked very closely, that's the other piece, the close connection between us as academics and our credit union partners. And you'll also hear a lot more about that in our afternoon session. And we worked very closely with Affinity Credit Union, and also early on we piloted some of our questions with Advantage, both in Saskatoon. And now we're creating an online survey. We actually got, our big coup is that we got the provincial SAS Central to include, I think it's 7 of our questions on their provincial-wide online survey. So we're going to reach about 1,500 people in the next, over the summer with some of our questions on impact. So that was one of our main goals, and we already reached that. We're also doing interviews with at least 1 or 2 credit unions. And then I think this is my last slide. So as I said, the big issue is what is the value added of credit unions? How can we get at the impacts? So how to understand the full set of impacts, right? The financials aren't really enough. They don't tell you enough about that. We need to expand our notion of what we think are impacts and how we measure it, because as I said, even when we start to ask a question that we think is an impact question, if people find it actually hard to even answer, so then how to help people think it through, or how do we get some kind of answer that then we can analyze for impact, how we consider that impact. That's back to then creating that multiplier. And the creative use of interdisciplinary, maybe new tools. That's our new challenge. And I'm done. So our session, Co-op Difference in Financial Co-ops, is room 3220 at the 4:30 session, when you'll all be tired.
Just have beer there and I'll come.
Yeah, we have to promise something, right? Or a striptease or something.
Oh, wow.
All right, next.
Just before I start, hope it's not part of my time, in the French program, il y a une erreur. J1 et H1 sont reversés. Oui. Alors, si vous voulez aller à 1 heure, I'll go back to English, to the cooperative development session, and you want to go to the one in French. Make sure that you reverse J1 and H1. Okay, so I'm very, very pleased to be here. It's great to hear everyone together speaking about measurement, and we're hoping that you come to some of the other sessions as we go through. Today I'd like to just very briefly introduce it. You'll hear more later. We want to talk about a little bit about our partnership, why measure cooperative sustainability, the scorecard project that is our project with some partners, and next steps. Our main partner, we're very pleased to say, is COP Atlantic in Eastern Canada. Léa Leblanc, you'll hear from later today, Monique Bourque and Romeo Cormier. Academic partners from 2 universities, Mount St. Vincent and L'Université de Moncton. The scorecard phase involved pilot project cooperatives, in the end 5 of them, and we're moving to the implementation stage, and there will be more cooperatives partnering in research there. Just a bit of background about COP Atlantic. You can just sort of read those figures. I can send you the PowerPoint if you want later. But they're a regional cooperative, and the consumer cooperatives are the ones that are our focus for our research. For those of you who may not be from Canada, the East is east of Quebec and sort of underneath, but you get a sense of the geographic size there. And the population is quite small. In Atlantic Canada, we're under 2.5 million people. So, voices from the sector in terms of what to measure cooperative sustainability. This is from the ICA. Cooperatives driven by their values have in many ways been pioneers of socially responsible business behavior, but it hasn't been doing as much as it should in measuring it. We need consistent and rigorous frameworks. Well, we're working rigorous. I don't know how consistent we're all being because we're working with different frameworks, but there is interesting overlap. So that statement was sort of an external audience. I took this from Sustainability Solutions Group. I don't know if any of them are here, but it's a wonderful website to go visit. Conducting and publishing annual sustainability assessments is a way for us to be transparent about our operations and accountable toward our members, associate members, etc. They also see it as a demonstration effect, engaging and inspiring other organizations, particularly cooperatives, to track and report. And then lastly, the annual sustainability assessment informs our annual and 5-year plans. So these two together, these two organizations, I think, give a pretty good sense of some of the key reasons that you co-ops might want to do this. I won't read all these, but our pilot cooperatives in the design phase themselves told us some of the ways in which they felt doing the scorecard was valuable to them. I particularly like that third one, tired of negativity. This is a positive action. Consumer cooperatives in the East are facing some big challenges. I don't know that we all use sustainability in all the same ways, and certainly in the cooperatives that we work with, they have different conceptions of it. We drew our inspiration, the academics and Co-op Atlantic, from Russ's early work, but that doesn't mean that the co-ops have the same approach. I think the first two little bullets that I've got there probably do capture a lot of what they're thinking. So sustainability is staying in business, because that's important for them, while also staying true to cooperative principles and values. And they really care about that and finding ways to integrate it. And I put here interrogating the relationship between co-ops activities and the environment. I wouldn't say that they're very far along yet. They're really working with that. And, Co-op Atlantic has a tool that they're using. But that whole idea of the human and natural environment. Again, the Sustainability Solutions Group, which is a consulting firm and does work in the area of sustainability, I really like their diagram, their nested approach. It's a little different from the triple bottom line that sees sort of 3 silos. And so again, this is on their website if you want, but the economy is embedded in society, society in turn is embedded in the ecology of the environment. So just quickly through our goals. So number 1 was to define and measure and prioritize factors that make cooperatives unique from the perspective of the groups we worked with, provide information useful for strategic planning. And that took us about 3 years to do this. It's complete, more or less. It will be evolving, of course, but it's ready, and with help from the pilot project cooperatives, it's structured in terms of the 7 co-op principles, and then some resonance with what Jessica was saying, economic measures, social measures, environmental measures. And then we're packaging that in with 2 surveys, an employee survey and a member customer survey. And basically there are 131 practices, as we call them, and each of those practices has indicators that are used to measure whether or not these practices are being followed. This is the Excel version. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but it gives you a sense of, these are the number is the basic practice. The one in orange is an associated practice for co-ops that want to dig a little bit deeper. And so that's all indicated. We're moving to a web-based version, as you'll hear later. At the request of the co-ops, the Excel version is too unwieldy for them. One of the columns is priority. And you'll hear why that's important, because the cooperatives themselves, as part of doing this, decide which practices are of a high priority at this particular point in their history. Who does the work? Some combination of board and management in a volunteer committee, but also we're hoping over time to engage more stakeholders, including employees and members in ways other than just surveys. So there's this idea of, again, primary stakeholders moving out into the broader stakeholders of community, suppliers, and so on. So it's quite a flexible tool that will enable them to do some of that. A second goal is to work with Co-op Atlantic and the co-ops to support the use of the tools. So we're doing quite a bit of work around that right now as we're rolling it out. We want to assess their experience with the process, including the factors that impede or promote the take-up of the tools. So that's going to be an important part of actually the research process. And the ways in which it feeds into the planning process. You may have heard in other sessions that we do these things and then they tend to sit on a shelf, and so we want to look at that. And obviously make improvements and changes as needed during the course of the next 2.5 years. Thirdly, and this I think is of great interest to the cooperatives too, is the aggregating the data to get a sense of the retail cooperatives in the region, and develop regional benchmarks for performance on the various measures, analyze patterns of performance on the cooperative difference, and even maybe compare what we see with co-ops with what we're seeing with SOBIs and Loblaws and other organizations that are producing social reports. Analyze the impact on a range of stakeholders insofar as this tool is able to measure that. We also want to strengthen the community of cooperative sustainability and planning practice. A language that's often used is contribute to the building of a community of practice. And we'd like to go beyond the region if we can, and that was one of the reasons that the Atlantic Cluster was involved in organizing these measurement sessions. Because the idea is to collaborate with interested other cooperatives and researchers using different tools, whether in the retail sector, in Canada, or abroad. So it's our longer term hope. And this is I think my last slide. This just shows you sort of the next year. So the AGM 2012, we're in the process of recruiting cooperatives to use the tool over the fall and winter. Actually, we're not in the process, don't tell my university. We're not in the process. That's good. That's good because I haven't got through ethics yet, but we will. Analyze the data and prepare reports, obviously, do preliminary analysis of the aggregated data, collectively reflect on not just the researchers in Co-op Atlantic, but the co-ops that are participating in this, their experience in using the tool to go to the next iteration. One of the other interesting things is that André Leclerc has been working with the Caisse Populaire in New Brunswick, doing an employee survey that has similarities to overlap with what's happening in the consumer sector. So there's some potentials opening up, for